Welcome all, this time I've decided to review Odessey and Oracle, the second studio album by the British pop-rock band The Zombies. Prior to the recording of this album, The Zombies had scored a major hit song with 1964's She's Not There, but outside of the immediate follow-up, Tell Her No, placing at number 6 on the Billboard 100 chart in the US, they hadn't been able to retain commercial and critical success. Also, by 1967, popular music had begun to trend away from Mersey beat and R&B and moved towards psychedelia and more experimental sounds. Feeling the need to present something along these wavelengths, the Zombies convened in the studio in mid-1967 to begin recording for Odessey and Oracle. The sessions were conducted at Abbey Road Studios and later at Olympic Studios in London. Unfortunately, unlike the Beatles, Pink Floyd, and other artists at the time, the band was unable to book a steady block of recording time, and so the album was put together piecemeal over the course of 6 months with a limited budget. Said budget, and a deadline for the album's completion, didn't allow for much time in studio to flesh out the songs as they were recorded, so the band rehearsed on their own before going in for recording. Most of the overdubbing on the album was done with the mellotron, a keyboard instrument that was a precursor to the use of true synthesizers in popular music. The specific mellotron used was the same one John Lennon had used on Strawberry Fields Forever. The album's sound mix was originally in monaural, but the record executives demanded that it be remixed into stereo. Because the album's tight budget had been completely spent by this point, band members Rod Argent and Chris White paid out of their own pockets to remix the album. Tensions also flared between band members during recording, and by the end of the sessions, morale was low. By the time the album was released in the spring of 1968, the band had split up, partly due to the poor performance of 2 singles taken from the album tracks. Let's take a closer look at the songs themselves. The album opens with Care of Cell 44, sung from the perspective of someone who's writing a letter in anticipation of soon seeing their loved one who's currently in prison. Despite the subject matter, this piece of baroque pop is very upbeat. Recorded in mid-August of '67, the song is driven by its piano part, features mellotron, and it continues the band's tradition of layered vocal harmonies, clearly inspired by Rod Argent's time in a church choir as a kid. This vocal approach is featured throughout most of the album tracks. With a mood in its refrain that brings to mind some of the songs from the Beatles' Rubber Soul album, Maybe After He's Gone is one of several songs on the album that lyrically is a wistful love song, other examples being Friends of Mine and I Want Her, She Wants Me, which I don't have much to say on. In the liner notes for my CD copy, Rod Argent says Maybe After He's Gone sounded better in its monaural mix due to the drum part not being as pronounced in stereo. I myself haven't examined the stereo mix of the album yet, so I'll take his word for it. Beechwood Park is a very atmospheric piece written by bassist Chris White, inspired by the park near where he grew up. Stylistically, it seems to share some similarities to A Wider Shade of Pale by Procol Harum, which at the time had just been released a few months prior to this song's recording. Funnily enough, the owners of the real Beechwood Park complained to the band about using the park's name. I think the song definitely benefits from the band's layered vocals. Very much a product of its time, Hung Up on a Dream was recorded in mid-July. It heavily features the mellotron, and according to the liner notes, this song was difficult to play live because they didn't have access to a mellotron for their shows. Despite Argent's dislike over the song having aged poorly, both musically and lyrically, I think the song is great. With a strong, optimistic mood, This Will Be Our Year has a brass quartet as its most notable feature. In the liner notes, Argent has pointed out that in live shows, a brass section would have been preferable for the song, since the alternative would have been to use a mellotron, which he says he knows from experience are temperamental instruments when used in live settings. Brief Candles features an interesting contrast between the quiet verses and the louder chorus. The verses are also notable for featuring both Rod Argent and Chris White on co-lead vocals, changing off with lead vocalist Colin Blunstone during the chorus. Inspired by the title, but not content, of a William Faulkner short story, A Rose for Emily was quickly written by Argent and was recorded in June and July of '67. The song's chorus makes very good use of the band's vocal harmonies. Likewise, Changes also features strong vocal harmonies as well as a prominent mellotron track, with the instrument set up to imitate flutes. Changes was the last song to be recorded for the album. A very moving recount of the horrors of the First World War, Butcher's Tale also serves as a commentary on the psychological effects likely felt by soldiers fighting in Vietnam at the time. In fact, this convinced Date Records to release the song as a single in mid-1968, despite the uncommercial sound. The song was recorded in late July of '67 and was completed in one take. In order to provide its unique sound, Rod Argent played a harmonium or pump organ, and sound effects, some pulled from a Pierre Boulez album, played backwards and sped up. The closing track, Time of the Season, went on to be the band's most successful song from the album, and one of their most well-known songs overall. While its initial release as a single in the spring of '68 went largely ignored, Date Records reissued it again in early 1969, and it peaked at number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the U.S. Its chart performance helped cement it as an apparent counterculture anthem of the late '60s. Musically, Argent's keyboard solos and the song's call and response vocals are its most memorable features. Odessey and Oracle was released in April of 1968 in the UK. While CBS Records decided not to release the album in the US at the time, musician and producer Al Cooper eventually convinced them to issue it on their subsidiary Date Records label 2 months later. Despite it receiving very little attention at the time, it's gone on to be considered an underrated classic. I got a copy of this album as a Christmas present back in 2016, and I've loved it since. My favorite songs are Time of the Season, Butcher's Tale, Hung Up on a Dream, Changes, and Beechwood Park. Thanks for tuning in. If you like what you heard, please like and subscribe. I plan on putting out more album reviews soon. Adios.